So, patch 1.2 is coming very soon and we are getting Albedo. And today this video will be talking about what he does, what I think his role is, whether he's good, whether you should roll for him, and what do you build for him. I'll try to answer most of them, but this is just what I think of him, and you can take it with a grain of salt, since we can only speculate until he's actually out. So let's get into his skills, and I'll try to simplify them so you won't get confused. His E skill, called Solar Isotoma, is basically a flower that he can place down that does things. You can hold E to choose where to place it as well. It will then create this sort of aura, and when you attack enemies within this aura, you will create transient blossoms, but I'll call them flower explosions, on the enemies. So you basically do a mini geo explosion on the enemies every time you hit them, but it has a cooldown of 2 seconds to stop you from continuously exploding. Let's get to the main part of this skill that everyone knows, but just in case you don't, you can actually stand on the center of the flower that you place down, and it'll lift you up like an elevator. And finally, you can only place one flower at a time, and it's considered a geo construct, so Zhongli's pillars can resonate with it. Now it will stay on the field for 30 seconds, but it has a cooldown of 8 seconds. This is pretty good in my opinion, so it will be constantly up and running, 100% uptime. Also, the flower explosions scale off defense, so that's something interesting. But before we go in depth to his E, let's talk about his ult, Tectonic Tide. It's pretty much just a giant geo explosion where he does big AoE geo damage in front of him. But it has something else. When you use it and there's a flower placed, 7 fatal blossoms, which I consider them a different type of flower explosion. Well, they are. The difference being they come out from the floor and you can only activate it with your ult. They will explode within the aura that the flower has created. See it as everything within the aura of your flower is gonna take extra geo damage. Important note, your ult and the fatal blossoms will not trigger your regular flower explosions. So that's just to not make his damage insane. This skill is gonna be pretty good though for 2 reasons. It's a 12-second cooldown and a 40 energy recharge cost. That's the same as Zhongli's ultimate, so it's gonna be really spammy. Next, we're gonna talk about his passives and constellations. His first passive is good for weapon ascension materials. You get 10% at getting 2 times the amount every time you craft them. His Ascension 1 skill basically increases your flower explosion damage by 25% on enemies below 50% HP. That's just a nice damage increase passive. His Ascension 2 skill is whenever he ults, your entire party gets 125 elemental mastery for 10 seconds, which is pretty nuts in my opinion. Now I'm gonna talk about Constellation 1, 2, 4, 6, since 3 and 5 are just skill upgrades. Con 1 allows the flower explosions to give 1.2 energy to Albedo. It's gonna be pretty good considering his ult energy requirement is already quite low. Con 2 allows the flower explosion to give Albedo a buff called Fatal Reckoning for 30 seconds. Each stack increases your damage by 30% of his defense, and you can stack it for 4 times. Using your ult will use up all the stacks and it increases the ult damage depending on how many stacks it used. This is also pretty good since you can get 4 stacks in like 8 seconds, since it's 2 seconds every flower explosion that can occur. So the big damage buff. Con 4 is just a meme con, except for if you have Xiao. Basically increases your plunge damage by 30% for anyone inside your flower aura. But I guess they want you to use the flower elevator for more reasons, I guess. But it's pretty meme-ish. Not worth it. Con 6 is that whenever anyone is within the flower aura and has a shield from Crystallize, it increases their damage by 17%. Alright, that's it for the skills. Let's talk about what I think his role is. Now I have one question that I want to know, and it will slightly affect his strength in a row. Actually, majorly, depending on how you see it. Will teammates be able to cause the flower explosions as well? Now, his E only specifies that when an enemy takes damage, it will occur. But does it apply to your other characters and their skills? And will he get the buffs from Con 1 and 2 from the other characters that trigger the explosions. Because if they can, he's easily a god tier burst support, especially for Geo teams, and a somewhat decent carry at Con 2. Since the flower is 100% uptime, it's going to give your current character a constant DPS boost if they can activate the flower explosions, with Ascension 1 giving a free DPS boost as well. His ult will be super spammy like Zhongli's, but instead of giving CC with Petrification, it will give your team a lot of EM for 10 seconds, and he has a cooldown of 12, so your whole team gets a big elemental mastery buff for majority of the time. Con 1, 4 and 6 do help with supporting as well. So let's say your other characters can't activate their flower explosions. His E will take the biggest hit as it won't contribute anything off the field without Constellation, but his ult is still pretty good, in my opinion. If that's the case, that you can't trigger the explosions with teammates, you can still play him as a secondary carry and it won't be that bad depending on the artifacts you run. If you want him to be a carry, Con 2 is the obvious choice to go for, cause that's pretty much his only carry constellation. Now you see me comparing him a lot with Zhongli because in my opinion, he's the Geo character I wanted Zhongli to be. And looking at his skills and numbers, he's just a more well-rounded Zhongli. His E is way better than Zhongli's pillars, and both their ults are big AoE Geo skills that you can spam, except Zhongli's does more damage and it petrifies. So there's that. So yeah, is he good? If my speculation about the flower explosions is correct, I think he'll be a viable slot for support and secondary carry. He has a lot of AoE damage and that's very nice for like Abyss. If not, I think he'll only be necessary for Geo teams. Should you roll for Albedo? Firstly, I would wait at least a week. If you're not sure whether you want him or not, let people test him out. Let people test him out first and give the final verdict before you waste your primos on a character you won't be satisfied with. But as to whether he will be worth, if you run a Geo team, I would say yes, you should roll for him. But if you have plenty of supports or are looking for a carry, you can probably pass on this banner, although you might be interested in the 4 stars. Lastly, what artifacts to use on him? If you're running him as a support, 4-piece Archaic Petra and 4-piece Noblesse is the obvious option. However, I think 2-piece Archaic and 2-piece Noblesse is a more balanced option and pretty good if you're out spamming. If you're running him as a carry, 4-piece Gladiator or the Archaic and Noblesse combo again seems like the best options. As for stats, you probably just want to run the usual attack and crit stats and geo damage for cup. However, if you have Con 2, I think defense might be a better or equally viable option. So yeah, that's my analysis and thoughts on Albedo. I hope you know more about Albedo and whether or not you should roll for him. I can't wait for 1.2 to come, as it's coming in 4 days for me. More updates is always good. Do let me know what you think of Albedo or 1.2, and I'll see you guys next time.